Psychedelic Ceremony and Addiction Recovery, featuring Paige and Fletcher from ETEREO. What happens when healing steps outside the clinic and into ceremony? Paige and Fletcher from ETEREO joined to discuss their psychedelic retreat work, which focuses on ceremonial healing using traditional medicines like Iboga and combining clinical approaches. They explained their philosophy of meeting individuals where they are in their healing journey, serving people dealing with addiction, mental health issues, and trauma through comprehensive screening and integration process. This conversation covered the evolution of psychedelic medicine from indigenous practices to modern applications, their upcoming Baja California Retreat Center, and how they acquire new clients primarily through word-of-mouth referrals. This episode does not advocate for or against psychedelic use, but instead opens a conversation about emerging pathways in healing and recovery, and the questions professionals should be asked. As psychedelic-assisted approaches continue to gain attention, how do we responsibly discuss risk, readiness, culture, and integration?
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
On this podcast episode, we are joined by two guests. Our first is Paige West. Paige brings a unique blend of personal transformation and professional leadership to ETEREO Baja. After her own Iboga journey catalyzed a profound healing process, she became an advocate for safety, spiritual safety, and professional standards in psychedelic practice. At ETEREO Baja, she oversees guest preparation, integration protocols, ceremonial offerings, and safety governance, ensuring every experience is trauma-informed, clinically supported, and spiritually attuned. Her leadership centers on transparency, integrity, and compassionate rigor, hallmarks of ETEREO Baja's reputation. Our other guest is Fletcher Burdick. Fletcher brings grounded hands-on leadership to ETEREO Baja, informed by years of collaboration with Iboga clinics and deep ceremonial study in Peru. Drawing on his background, funding, and operating a construction company, he integrates practical execution with a deep respect for structure, process, and integrity in the development of ETEREO's Regenerative Healing Center. With over a decade of experience in the psychedelic space, he applies ceremonial depth and cultural alignment to clinical and business context, guiding operations and strategy through thoughtful, values-driven collaboration. Fletcher's approach to psychedelics remain rooted in humility, never claiming origination, always honoring the lineages and traditions that came before. You can learn more about Paige and Fletcher in the podcast notes. Let's welcome them to this episode. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we're actually joined by two guests. Welcome, Paige West and Fletcher Burdick.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.
Yeah, we're going to learn a lot, especially about ETEREO and everything that you do there. But before we dive more into that, can you two give a little bit of background about yourselves individually?
Yeah, I am Fletcher Burdick. I'm the co-founder of ETEREO, where we focus on grounded, integrated healing work that is really rooted in land, relationship, reciprocity, and most importantly, staying really human through all of it. And I found my way into this work sort of the classic way, but in a big, giant mess of my life first, and then slowing down long enough to listen, learn, and clean it all up. So yeah, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you sharing that. And Paige, what about?
I am Paige. I am also the co-founder of ETEREO, and I am an Iboga provider as well as a 5-MeO-DMT provider. I have been hosting international retreats for about 13 years, and I also have a background in history and birth work. So being a doula has also really informed my caregiving, and it's really the foundation of my work. As Fletcher so beautifully put, right, like we have founded ETEREO and we are really, grounded into experiential retreats and ceremonial experiences for healing and growth and transformation. Yeah, we've seen a lot, we've seen it all, and we're super proud to be, sitting here today doing this work.
How do you begin to explain to people what it is that you do? I feel like this is something that sometimes is not something everyone's familiar with. There's still a lot of, I may have never even heard of it, or I've heard someone say something, but that may have just been um, word of mouth from someone else who actually they might not know what it is. A lot different than if I say something like motivational interviewing or I say like a certain kind of counseling treatment. So how do you begin to explain to people exactly what you offer?
It's difficult at parties when someone asks you what you do or in social settings. For a while, I used to kind of actually just stick to doula or I'm a psychedelic doula just to be, convenient. But if I'm really getting into it, yeah, it can be a bit abstract, but the sacred medicines, master plants, molecules that we work with are powerful and important. And so we have had the privilege of, studying traditions. So we really, what we do is we bring people together to witness each other through their healing journey, and we hold space rather than fill it, as my husband Fletcher beautifully says. And we really get to witness this transformation through these beautiful tools and traditions. Kind of still abstract. Maybe you have something to add to it, Fletch.
No, that was
I like how you mentioned though, like what you would say at some event where you just tell people, "Hey, well, what do you do?" And because I go through that too. Sometimes I talk about
yeah.
when people ask me, "What do you do?" and I'm a counselor. People don't necessarily even know what that is. They have a different idea. So I imagine it's more challenging for some of the work that you do because it's not very well known to a lot of people. There's a lot of misconceptions about what it is, or when I was talking to someone about psychedelics before, they were like, "Oh, is that still a thing?" Like they thought it was in the past.
Very much the same.
Yeah, yeah. So, but is that something you can speak on? Because I would say in the last three, 3 to 5 years, psychedelics has definitely come up a lot more in addiction work, mental health work. I've seen it now presented on at conferences, talked about at trainings, it wasn't before. It was sort of like a taboo topic. So is there anything you can share about the psychedelics in general, about where it is today and maybe what a lot of people are not realizing about that?
Well, I think we both certainly can, but what I'll start with is this sort of concept of what we're experiencing right now is in some ways called the third wave, and or a psychedelic renaissance, which in some ways is tricky territory because these master plants and molecules have been used by indigenous folks for thousands and thousands of years, and they're really, stewards of these medicines. And so that is what I personally would consider to be that first wave and understanding is, when we as humans used to live in villages and community living, and there were, medicine men and women and, ways of working with plants and having such a deep relationship to the earth. And so that's really like the core and the essence and the truth of working with psychedelics. And then, of course, we know the second wave is, the 60s, the Summer of Love, Tim Leary, Richard Alpert, also known as Ram Dass, and where there was studies being done, and then of course it became incredibly counterculture and taboo and stigmatized, and then you have Nancy Reagan saying just say no and that whole thing in the 80s, and so I would say from the late 80s to the 90s on, because I believe MAPS, which is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, was founded sometime in the 80s. That is when, these studies started getting picked back up. The 90s rave culture sort of took a boom. And so right now we're experiencing this really powerful time in history where we're seeing that, big pharma is problematic, just to say the least. That's a whole other podcast, I think. And these old ways of working with the earth really deserve some attention. And I think that we've taken a rough term, long term, however you want to frame it, for humanity for a while now. And I think that particularly when it comes to mental health and substance use issues and things like that, getting back to the earth and looking at these traditions and seeing how we can change our perspective. And then of course there's all of these wonderful like neurological benefits and physical benefits and things like that. But to me it's much deeper than that. So yeah, I think that's my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about how try to look at like progress, progression, innovation. It always seems like a forward thinking. So this almost a different approach, which is not, it's trying to go back to how things were for a long time and how it worked for many people, not trying to create something that is necessarily brand new or the thing that you'd expect to see as this pristine packaging, I would say, as far as like this great new thing. But almost like we're trying to go back to a lot of what worked for a long time and what people did for many, many years, way before that. This is more of a trip back towards roots and common ground versus like trying to discover something or create something that's just considered so innovative. Am I right on that, or is there some
I
point
think
that?
so.
Absolutely. It's remembering.
It's a remembering, absolutely. And that's certainly what we're trying to do at ETEREO. I know there's a different perspective and different schools of thought within the psychedelic community. And a lot of people have this perspective of like optimization and, extractions and looking at these, molecules and how can we patent this? And there's certainly that perspective, the biohackers and all of that and longevity people. And so there is a perspective of innovation, but I would say at Ethereum, like that is our perspective. I think that it's certainly valuable in its own way. But for us, we're trying to really like deepen and get, as you said, closer to the root, closer to the truth, closer to that remembering place.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think you bring up a great point. I'm curious how, because with something like psychedelic, there is so much newer things coming up. There's different things that are popping up, people talking about it. It seems like it's definitely becoming more of a mainstream. I I do think sometimes people are not sure what to what to trust or like what does this mean versus that. You mentioned like different schools of thought, which may be an entirely different concept. But some people might think everyone working with psychedelics has the same train of thought. So how would you talk with people about how to sort of filter through that information or from what they see when they hear about things like psychedelics, they hear about retreats, like as someone who's trying to understand more, what sort of feedback would you give for someone to help them explore it more versus being put off to where it might be like, nope, this is just like not gonna work or not my thing. Any sort of recommendations you would give people?
Yeah, I would say, approach with a lot of discernment, and really drop in with yourself and check in with your needs. There's differences in, a clinical model, such as like, things with Ibogaine. There's a lot of talk about Ibogaine. And, there's a ceremonial approach. So I think it's, based on your needs and what you're looking for. I think, it's about having a lot.
It is a little bit of the Wild West, so to say, because a lot of these medicines are unregulated or in gray area, right? So Fletcher and I both functioned as like underground providers when we were still living in the United States and, taking that risk and, again, requiring a lot of discussion in our work. Now we're like out and loud and proud with our websites and have this beautiful piece of land in Mexico, and we have the privilege of living in a place where things are a lot more open about ceremony and healing. And and yeah, so I think trusting yourself too, really trusting yourself, and you're the one that you've been waiting for. A person or a plant outside of you is not going to do anything that you cannot do for yourself. It may open a doorway, it may shed some layers, but really trusting yourself, I would say, is one of the things that I would invite people to do when they're on their search.
And I went to your website. I pulled up again. I saw like why safety is sacred because I think one of the things that people have a concern about is like, oh, you just go, you just do this. But like there are things about like safety. I see things about screening process, looking at certain things. And I'm not sure a lot of people realize some of all those things that play a role in this versus this idea that someone just shows up, buys something, takes something, let's see what happens. Like there's a lot more to this than just like a, stop and buy and let's hope it works. So how do you describe sort of more of this whole process experience? I guess maybe that'd be a great way to kind of talk about this with someone, which it's going to be different, I imagine, but just an idea of someone who's like, what does this even look like? What would it be like to go on a retreat or even have this experience? Is there any kind of sort of general way to describe sort of like how this may look?
So I am curious, does your community have an understanding of what Iboga is or what Chuma or 5-MeO-DMT? Like, do they have any
I would say
orientation
some.
to medicine?
I would say you'd have a few that would be
Okay.
very attuned to that and very
Uh-huh.
well known. But I would also say you'd probably have a lot of people that are like, "What did she just say? Those are new words to me."
Oh,
Okay.
probably
Okay.
probably more so ibogaine. No, there's a lot of talk about ibogaine in the addiction
Hmm.
realm right now. So,
For sure. So I'll just give, some cliff notes on actually what we provide, and
Yeah,
then,
that'd be great.
we're happy to kind of drop into the process as well. So at ETEREO, we offer three sacred medicines: Iboga, Wachuma, which is also known as San Pedro, and 5-MeO-DMT, which is also sometimes called Bufo or the toad. And so these medicines are all really sacred to us. They're incredibly cohesive in their application, and two of them have traditions that are deeply connected to them. One being Bwiti. Bwiti is a spiritual tradition based out of West Equatorial Africa, and that is connected to Iboga. So I've had the privilege of experiencing initiations to learn about this way of being and this, again, spiritual tradition. Wachuma is connected to a spiritual tradition called the ETEREO, among others, in the high Andes of Peru, and Fletcher has spent time there experiencing initiations as well. And so we consider ourselves bridge people, and we really we bring back what we've learned from these beautiful villages, and we share with our, primarily Western clients. And, oftentimes it's the first type of exposure to any sort of indigenous spiritual tradition. And so those are the three medicines that we offer. We have various formats of retreat. So again, as Fletcher said, your community might have an awareness of what ibogaine is. Ibogaine is quite popular these days, particularly in attending to opioid addiction. So Iboga is a full spectrum plant, and ibogaine is one isolated alkaloid from it. And so ibogaine clinics offer this semi-synthetic alkaloid, and it actually interrupts addiction, addictive patterns, and can reset your dopamine, reset your opioid receptors, etc. And a significant amount of withdrawal symptoms can be eliminated within like 24 hours. Everybody is different, so we don't want to say too big of promises there. And so what we offer is ceremonial Iboga, and ceremonial Iboga is the full spectrum plant, which means it has ibogaine in it, but it also has a ton of other alkaloids that are working in a symbiosis. So Fletcher and I both have a history of working in and sort of around ibogaine clinics and supporting people in that space. but we have found more connection to the ceremonial sort of way of working with us. I, in particular, don't think that blue tea and Iboga should be separated. And I think that when someone goes to an iodine clinic, oftentimes that not only are we extracting an alkaloid, but we're also extracting the tradition, we're extracting the spiritual context. So with these three medicines, some of them, like Iboga, requires much more rigorous medical screening. Something like Wachuma has lower contraindications, but we still have, an intake form, health and medical. I mean, our intake form has like 90 questions on it. We have, a team of therapists, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have first responders on our team, and we all sort of piece it together. I haven't spoken much about 5-MeO, but 5-MeO is a much shorter experience. So, it that doesn't mean it doesn't back up.
Let the duration.
Yeah, don't let the duration fool you. But sometimes we do one-on-one sessions. Sometimes that is within a retreat setting. So, I've got a mouthful. I think that's kind of the base of what we offer. And yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Seth, or any questions.
Yeah, that was good. I mean, just to kind of go back to working in the Ibogaine content and with Ibogaine and having experienced Ibogaine, working inside those clinics really kind of gave us a front row seat to both the strengths and the limitations within that model. And that understanding is a deeply personal one for both of us. It quite literally saved my life, and I experienced it at a time when this sort of work was still sort of on the fringes and at the edge of becoming more known and accepted for the standard safety protocols and integration frameworks and before the best practices that we know today were really developed. And yeah, I mean, I just remember crawling into that space on my hands and knees. Had exhausted every option. I was in search of answers and healing, physically depleted, deeply dysregulated, and my nervous system was fried. And then, later after the Ibogaine, experiencing a level of internal quiet that I just didn't know or think was possible. And for the first time in my life, that noise was just gone. So that interruption really gave me my life back. But yet I relapsed not long after. You know, and in looking back, I don't see that relapse as a failure of Ibogaine. I see it as a failure of context and integration. Ibogaine really has the potential to reset your system on all levels, but it doesn't provide a structure to translate that opening into a different way of living. So yeah, Ibogaine is powerful and potent and transformational, but there are gaps and blind spots in that model for sure.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of. I think I've had like 3 or 4 other potential guests reach out, and they want, like, it was about Ibogaine, like that's what they want to talk about, like what they were. So I've just been, from that alone, I've just seen, like, I've never gotten this type of like request before on this specific thing, and it's just been like in the last like couple months. So I'm curious, when you have people reaching out or wanting to learn more. I mean, are you seeing? Was it from all walks of life? Is it people struggling with addiction mostly? Is it mental health? Is it relationship? Are we talking the full range? Like, what is it that you mostly see from like people who are seeking, your services?
We see people from all walks of life, every age, every demographic, I mean, as I said, it is primarily Western people, but all over the world, internationally for sure. And, many people come to us with substance use issues. Many people come to us with some mental health challenges, whether that be anxiety, depression, trauma, ADHD, and then we also have a significant group of people that come to us with autoimmune issues, TBI, traumatic brain injuries, kind of like wound healing stuff, PMDD, PCOS. And then we have also a really great, solid amount of people coming to us seeking life's purpose, wanting to deepen their relationship with themselves, their curiosity, their creativity, their ancestral work. I mean, we really see all different types of intentions. I think each medicine has like its own sort of way of sharing its consciousness with you. So the right people are usually drawn to the medicine that would be the most supportive for them. It happens really naturally, and we trust the process always.
Yeah, I'm curious that there's in a lot of like the work that I do, sometimes what gets presented is like some issues, some problem that's going on, but not everyone shows up being like, I really want to get into who I am and what I'm feeling. And like a lot of it's a symptom or it's something that's like an external thing going on. But I'm curious in your work, do you find there are quite a people who are like, I know I got this stuff going on, but this is more about trying to connect with me or finding more about me, like a deeper level of desire to achieve versus just like symptom remission or just a problem to go away. I'm just curious if that may be something you see in people wanting to dive deeper right away versus it takes a while for us in other ways of, counseling, treatment, therapy, that digging deeper isn't usually what people walk in wanting to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the reason that we're feeling more called to the more ceremonial approach. We spend a lot of time with our guests in how they approach the medicine itself. We ask them to really slow down and get clear on the questions that they're bringing in. And not just about how to stop a behavior, about what role that behavior is playing in their life. So it's less about reducing symptoms and getting to the root cause of what those symptoms are. So yeah, I think that's where the deeper work lives. Is getting in there and facing yourself.
I think a lot of people also come to us having explored a lot of other modalities, right? Like maybe they've already tried therapy, they've gone to rehab, they've, tried medications, whatever their attempts have been to support themselves and to help them to feel better. Oftentimes there's like a blockage or there's something that is just preventing them to get to that next level. And when we work with plant medicine and these, amazing traditions that have existed for thousands and thousands of years, I think people come in pretty ready, I mean, there are different degrees of readiness for sure, and that's what we're there for, to support with all the preparation, all the integration, everything that happens inside the retreat containers. But people come in pretty like, yeah, I mean, a lot of people actually are kind of done with therapy. So we have, the best team of therapists at ETEREO. They're like the least therapists, right? Like they come in, honoring the medicine, honoring the tradition, knowing that we are a ceremony, tradition, medicine forward space, and we work with therapy as a tool versus there are some psychedelic therapists that have therapy at the front and center, and then they might use psilocybin or something like that as a tool, and we're sort of that inversion. So a lot of people come to us really ready to play that game.
I like how you mentioned ceremony. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like that's something that not many other types of treatment or modalities
Mm-hmm.
experience is this ceremony with it. It might be like, here, try this or do this, but I imagine what makes a big difference or what plays a major role in this is that ceremony aspect. Even the fact that you call it like that's part of what it is. So how does ceremony play a role in all of this?
I think ceremony is something that has existed since the beginning of time. And I think that we experience little micro ceremonies every day in our life, and we don't call them ceremonies. Maybe that's making your coffee or tea in the morning and the ritualistic nature of doing those things, you know? And I think that it's really something that it's such an important aspect of who I am. Fletcher's smiling at me. He's like, she can't wait to answer this question. Yeah, ceremony and ritual. I mean, there's a somatic experience connected to that, right? Like you're doing something physical with your body and less sort of in that monkey mind and moving through these sort of steps and rituals. And it really transports you, you know? And there's a practical aspect of ceremony. There's, again, like those steps that you take within it. And then there's the mystical part of um, and that is this like intangible, powerful, ethereal, essence that I think a lot of us are missing in our life. And I think honestly, our life is a ceremony, and I think it is incredibly healing, and powerful to drop into those spaces. I mean, we have been sitting around the fire together, listening to our elders since the beginning of time. It can be as simple as that. It can be as simple as lighting a candle. You know, it doesn't have to be this big production. Like, oh, I don't know how to do this. How can I create a ceremony? You know, it feels inaccessible. But we are not, these people that are on a mountaintop of enlightenment. We are human beings, and we've got, kids, and we're married, and animals, and a house, and all of these things. And we just try to bring it into our life in the best way that we can. And so when we teach people about this, we really invite them to figure out what resonates with you and bring it into your own life, whether that's a fire ceremony, whether that's, sitting quietly, whether that's building an altar, sacred special items from your life. Altars are so important. They're ways of communicating with your ancestors. They're ways of communicating with yourself and the earth.
Amazing how quickly something can have that ceremony attached to it, but also the very same thing can be just all of a sudden just a task to just do or just go through the motions. Like you mentioned coffee, can't think of how many people who, make their coffee, have their coffee, and it's just a part of waking up and getting the day going. But then also I know a lot of people who are talking about like there's importance in tradition or ceremony to like sitting with their coffee in the morning and like not doing anything else, whether that be watching the sunrise, that might be taking some breaths, it might be doing some journaling or sitting somewhere, but like the very same thing to someone else could be a difference of checking off a box to just get going with no thought whatsoever to it versus something that is sitting with themselves or having some deep thought or just some purpose, some tradition. But we don't slow down all the time and look at that. I think that's a piece that's missing quite a bit in people's lives is what kind of ceremony or tradition do you have just in your day to day? Because I don't know, if you would have asked me that before, I probably would have said, I don't know what I would have said, but I do. But knowing that it can happen every day is so easy if we put intention to it.
Mm-hmm.
Intention and presence, everything can be a ceremony. Everything. Sweeping the floor, vacuuming the floor, doing the dishes, it can all be the ceremony of life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's amazing. I don't think we talk about that enough. I think that's just how do we bring that ceremony more into our daily lives, even to the things that we might not enjoy doing. If you make a ceremony with it and sit with it, it can be something that's not the most dreaded thing anymore, So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that. So, an interesting question is that I was wondering. I don't ask everybody this, but how do people find out about you? Because it doesn't seem like it's just something that's easy to discover, that it's a topic that some people might have no idea about, or they're not even aware of it. So how do you, or how have you, because I'm sure it was different when you first tried this to where you are now, but how do you sort of reach out to people, and how do people learn about you? I think that's probably different than a lot of other places that are just looking for a Google search or something. So can you explain a little bit about like how you've tried to either share what you've done, or has it been people tell other people, and word of mouth referrals a big thing? So I'm just curious about that aspect with what you do.
Yeah, I mean, word of mouth referrals definitely make us are the most rewarding and make us feel the best, you know. But we're on Instagram. We have a website. People search for ceremony on Google and we pop up. So we're on all the normal outlets and ways of being found. For
We're on all the normal outlets, and as Fletch said, like, yeah, I mean, we've got our marketing ways and all of that, but
sure.
as Fletch said, like, the referrals are absolutely the best. There's word of mouth. A lot of people will go to a retreat and then they share with their community, "Ah, this changed my life. This has been so amazing." And, so we really love that. I think also from our team, we have, as I've shared, right, we have a team of therapists. So sometimes they even refer their clients to us, and, and they sort of have their greater community. So I think referral based, again, feels the most rewarding and aligned. But we love when people kind of cold call us, cold reach out. We get that a lot. We don't have to search for people; they find us.
It's pretty incredible. And I always say the unofficial gold standard is when you would send your family there. If you wouldn't send your family member there, why would any other family member want to make that
Hmm.
decision? But also that word of mouth is so important because it's also very fragile. Like if you don't provide good quality of service or care for somebody, that can also really go against a reputation or something. So like I believe it's very important that we continue to make that referral for word of mouth. It's so valuable, making that, and knowing that that's where that comes from for you is a good indication that people are talking and saying, "Hey, I tried this or did this, and I think it'd be great." My fear, and I'll tell you where that question comes. My fear would be is that there is something out there that is helpful, that works for people, that provides this, but if people aren't hearing about it and trying it or using it could just get faded and lost. And you still want to see that happen. So it's great to see the exposure you've been able to get with your services.
That's why we're here talking to you too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We do. We want to get the word out about these practices and modalities, and I mean, it has been countless times where our clients will be in ceremony or coming out of ceremony, integration circle, and they're like, "Oh, my mom needs to do this, my wife needs to do this, my brother needs to do
Very
this."
common.
And sometimes we're like, "All right, allow your presence and energy to speak without fitting people, right? Like, you should do this, take it
Your,
slow, and yeah,
your experience is not their experience. You know,
exactly.
everyone is so different, and uh, yeah, I mean, it's also not for everybody. You know, I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of talk in the addiction realm right now about what fails and what works and where the success rates are. You know, and it's really unfortunate. You know, I don't think one person is qualified or equipped to speak in absolutes or definitives on a certain approach that works or doesn't work. You know, we're talking about human beings here, and it's a deeply personal and unique journey. And I think were a way to speak in absolute, I think we would be epidemic of grand proportions that that we're in right now, so it's to each their own, and yeah, what works for you is not going to work for somebody else. I saw, in my process of getting clean, I saw things that absolutely wouldn't work for me work miracles for some people, so
Yeah, one thing I've always told people, because I sometimes get asked, like, how do you, work with people and do this type of stuff? And what I've shared is that I also don't get to choose people, like choose where I join people in their journey. So I might be their very first counselor. I might be their 10th counselor, so, and I was curious about that because sometimes you mentioned how people have gone through a lot of other experiences who then they may then seek out your services. And then I'm thinking like, well, what if they tried you first versus trying all these others? But like,
That
sometimes we,
happens
we don't
too.
get to choose
that
that. Like we just need,
that that happens too, and definitely, I mean, that's a good point. There is a certain level of unlearning that you have to do. You're the 10th counselor. You have to do some unlearning with your client, or you're the fifth medicine retreat that somebody's come to. It's like everyone's approach is different, and yeah, again, I mean, to each their own.
and that's why part of me is this, no matter where they are at, to just be fortunate to join them at this time, not being able to say I'm going to join them at the time where I know it's going to work, or I'm not going to the first time because maybe it won't work. But, it's just, I don't know many people who have been like, ooh, I did this one thing and it took care of everything. Like it's not this straight line, which is just not fun.
Like, yeah,
As someone that likes to run trails and climb mountains, just a straight line is just not how it works.
yeah.
There's different paths, there's up and downs, like there's getting lost sometimes. It's part of how it is, but we sometimes hold a tight standard for people when we get into this wanting people to change or thinking they gotta stop now. And thankfully I've done this a long time where a lot of those views early on, I can admit having have changed. So it's amazing to see also that there's that experience for people to, yeah, it might not have worked, but I'm trying it again. I've tried it from somewhere else, and this is another one of those. I've
We
got,
have people who will leave a retreat will say those words like, this didn't work. And then 3 or 4 months later, they'll call us and say, everything in my life has changed. So when you leave a retreat or you leave a specific container, it's not going to be wrapped up in a beautiful little bow. That's not how life is. You really have to trust the process, trust the process and trust the thread of your life.
I like how you say that because I imagine some media portrayals of retreats is like you go here and then all of a sudden it's like person walks out of the front gates of the retreat and it's just like everything is I'm a new person and
Totally.
everything has changed. But I think you just highlight that this is not you come here and there might be some new doors opened, or there might be some insight, or there might be some awareness there, but this isn't like this journey has ended, that this is
No,
done.
a lot of the time, the expectation that people come in with is like, oh, I'm gonna find deep level of clarity. And what they end up finding is, the person that put them in the mess they're in the first place. So it's
Mm-hmm.
it's tough work. It's not, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, one last question before we wrap up our conversation. If you had one chance, like this elevator pitch talk to like someone who's a pretty big skeptic over this type of service or psychedelics, because I imagine there's still a lot out there, a lot more than some other forms of treatment and therapy. So like if you had your elevator moment to be able to talk to someone who's a pretty big skeptic over what you're offering or your service, what would be the thing, or maybe a couple things that you would really try to talk about or just share with that person to try to see more than what they're kind of currently blocking themselves?
Well, what I would first say to a person who had that energy is, I am not here to change your mind, but you know where to find me when you're ready. You know where to find me
Converting.
when you're
We're not in the
ready.
business of converting skeptics.
But what I will say, just to go a little deeper, because truly, like, I'm not here to change your mind. But I do think that everybody comes from a different approach, and certain things might land more with one person than another, right? So one person might really resonate with the neurological benefits, and they might really resonate with some of the science and how this really affects the mind and body. Another person might have a much stronger spiritual orientation, and another person, may find value in being in a group setting connected to nature. So I really think, we're not really big protocol people. We're not really blanketed, this is the way, and this is the thing that is going to change your mind, or this is the thing that's going to help you. We really tune into each person. So, but I do find that people that are skeptics, they do start kind of turning their head when you start talking about some of the neurological benefits and some of those things, because there's something a little more tangible about that. So that's something that I do like to speak to, but I don't know. I don't know if that's
Well, it's a good answer because I think there could also be just they're thinking about this because of something they heard from someone or because of what's been portrayed inaccurately. And my worry would be is once again, you have someone that could be they could have someone who asks them about what do you think about psychedelics? And if they're very skeptic and not trusting, like that could be then passed down to someone that they so I think like but I also love your approach of like not try. I think when you try to over sell someone or try to over convince someone like that doesn't work. Like even best intention, you're trying to explain this or try to help them understand what it is. But sometimes when there is that over attempt to explain it or try to convince someone, it doesn't usually work out that way. So I do find like your approach of I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm not going to try and change your mind. If you ever do want to learn more or talk about it, let me know. But also like there's things about touching on like the science behind it or the neurobiology behind it where that might be what someone is connected to. So I think that's a great approach because I've had I've heard those conversations where people have had the skepticism about psychedelics or where they've been like, no, we don't want to hear about this or um but I just worry then that just kind of keeps out information, that just keeps away some knowledge. And that's just what I don't want to have happen with something that we're seeing provide a valuable service to people.
Absolutely. I mean, people find us at the exact perfect moment in their life. And, a seed is planted often and it sprouts at the perfect time. And the same time that that seed is planted is often not the same time. It's never the same time that it sprouts, right? So sometimes it takes some time. And we trust that. When I first started doing this, I was a very well-intended soapboxer. I was like, let's talk about this. And just don't do that anymore. I couldn't wait for somebody to ask me about it at a party. And now I'm like, don't ask somebody at the party, you know?
Yeah, that's great. Well, all right. So final takeaway. Um, Anything you want to share with the audience? Now we're gonna in the podcast notes we'll have links to the website. Anything else that we want them to have to learn more about you two, your team, and everything that you do. But any final takeaway from each of you on what you want to leave audience members with?
You know where to find us.
Mm-hmm.
Come find us. Come join the ETEREO too and experience our retreat with us. Your life will be changed.
It's true. It's absolutely true. I think the only thing that I want to share that I guess we didn't really share is that we are building a really beautiful center on 24 acres of land, and we've been, offering our services in really beautiful spaces all over the world for a long time. And now we have this land that we are stewarding in the middle of the desert in Baja California, Sur. And it's an amazing, incredible space. And I would just love for anybody who is interested to come and see it and be there with us, because I think the land speaks and the land holds us in ways that, you know, a sort of a little more sterile retreat center vibe, you know, can't do. So I'm just really excited about our land and our project and everything that we're trying to build. It's been hosting retreats all over the place, and now we're building our own spot. So
That's incredible. Thing that you probably imagined at some point a while ago or never imagined it can happen, and now it's becoming a reality. So congratulations on that.
thank you.
Yeah. So thank you both for joining Paige and Fletcher. It was a great conversation to hear about what's going on, what you two are doing, your team's doing. I think a lot of audience members will get a much more in-depth look at this than they may have had since listening to previous episodes. So I want to thank you for bringing that to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media. Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.